Hey, I'm Billy Hollowell. Welcome to Pure Talk, a show brought to you by pureflix.com. I am joined today by Luke Zamperini, son of famed evangelist, World War II hero, and all-around incredible guy, Louis Zamperini. Thanks for joining us today.
It's a pleasure, Billy.
So the reason you're here is because there's going to be another chance very soon here to hear about your father's story. Once again, a lot of people might remember 2014, the film Unbroken, huge film, very touching movie. There's now a sequel to that movie coming out, and it's called Unbroken, A Path to Redemption. So I guess to start, I wanted to ask about what it was like as a child. How much did you know about your father's story?
Well, I knew about my father's story right away, even when I was, as far back as I can remember, because these were my bedtime stories growing up. I was aware that all the heroic acts that he did, the survival at sea, the prison camp, all that, because I not only were these my bedtime stories, but I would go with him when he'd go on speaking tours and talk about his story. And he talked about his story from almost the moment he got back from World War II. What was a discovery was after a while realizing that I was the only kid in the neighborhood who had a father like that.
Who was an Olympian, a World War II hero, and somebody who overcame an incredible amount of horrific things during the war and forgave and became a Christian. I mean, yes, I would imagine you were probably the only one in the neighborhood who had that.
Yeah, well, you know, a lot of people have great stories, you know, and my dad's story is full of great stories. I mean, any one segment is a story by itself. Punk kid makes it into sports. Athlete makes it to the Olympics. Olympian joins the military. Soldier crashes at sea and survives for 47 days. Famous American athlete picked up by Japanese and put into a prison camp. There are all these great stories, of course. This one is just one episode after another, after another, after another. And, you know, people tell me that when they've read the book, that they just keep thinking it's the end of the book, and then there's another thing happens, you know.
Another incredible thing happens. So we're going to get into a lot of different elements here. The fact there are two different films here, right? Such a big story. And so we'll get into that, we'll talk about it, but this is a good point for us to stop and actually play the trailer for Unbroken, A Path to Redemption. We can roll that.
Bless you, Louis. Welcome home. All of Torrance was praying for your safe return.
I just thought I'd be able to forget everything.
You need help.
Here tonight, there's a drowning man, just looking for some type of hope for the future. Just reach out.
Unbroken, Path to Redemption, rated PG-13, September 14th.
Well, that looks like such an incredible story. And I think for those who saw the first part of it, you know, in 2014, there's a lot of excitement to sort of hear the rest of the story, maybe the parts that people read about in the book and they didn't get a chance to see on the big screen. So the natural question, and I'm sure you're getting a lot, is why didn't it all fit into the first film? Why is there a second movie?
Well, you know, that was the question I had when we first met with the first production team and the director, Angelina Jolie. And I'd read the script, and I was basically protesting, saying, you're not telling the whole story. And I was told, well, we don't have the time to tell the whole story. Apparently, time in filmmaking is everything. And so they only had 2 minutes and 17 seconds to tell the story, and so they could only tell it up to a certain point. And so what's explored in Path to Redemption, they would not have been able to do it justice with the extra 10 or 15 minutes they might have been able to add on to the film. I believe things happen for a reason. I think that Angelina's telling of Unbroken was, I thought it was wonderful. But I think that the telling of this portion of the story was meant to be told by a different crew, different perspective, a Christian perspective, if you will.
Well, and I think that's the thing, too, when you watch that first movie, there's so much in it. And as you were going through all the things in your dad's life, getting that, I think, story arc that gets you to forgiveness and seeing what he had to go through, being held as a POW and the abuse, and then being able to forgive, and I don't want to spoil all of it for those who haven't seen the first movie or read the book, but being able to get to that place of forgiveness later on, to condense that into a film that tells that story is a lot. And so you see why all of the other elements Particularly, one of the things that I had found interesting, and I had not made it all the way through the book, so I didn't know the second part of it, but your mom in 1949, Cynthia, going to this Billy Graham event and really having this heart change and the ripple effect of that and how it changed, eventually your father changes. So tell me about that event and what it did in your mother's life.
Well, first of all, my father was having these tremendously horrible dreams. Today we know it's called post-traumatic stress disorder, but back then they didn't know what it was. And of course, he was self-medicating with alcohol. He was getting in fights. He didn't know where to turn. And it got to a certain point where my mom just said, "I've had enough." You know, my sister had just been born. She was just a few months old. And she said, "That's it, I'm getting a divorce," because there was no helping him. And so, you know, she got invited to go to a revival meeting in downtown Los Angeles, and she asked my dad to go, and he said, "There's no way." But she goes anyhow, and she comes home that night and says that, she said, "Well, Louis, because of the newfound joy in my heart, I'm not going to divorce you." Of course, that's great news for Dad. And she says, "But there's a condition." She said, "You got to go back with me and hear this guy preach." And he says, "Well, there's no way." And she just talked him into it. And he says, "Okay, look, under this one condition, that when it gets to the point where he's telling me a sinner, I don't need to hear that. If I get offended, we're leaving." She says, "Okay, that's fine." So they go, and sure enough, he gets offended. And so he drags her out of the tent. It was a big tent meeting in downtown Los Angeles. It was Billy Graham's first great crusade, the crusade that put him on the map. And so he gets home and says, "Don't ever take me to a place like that again." And she said, "Well, I just want to remind you that because of the new relationship I have in my heart with Jesus Christ, I'm not divorcing you." So she talks him into going back a second time. But the same conditions apply. When he gets offended, they are out of there. And so sure enough, it gets to the point in the sermon where he's had enough, and he starts to walk out of the tent. And you know, he hears Reverend Graham saying something to the effect that when you get to the end of your rope, this is when people turn to God to save them from whatever situation they're in. And it reminded him of something that we actually saw in the first film, which was at a really low point on the raft, he prayed a prayer that was, "God, if you get me home from this alive, I will seek you and serve you my entire life." And sure enough, you know, he felt really bad when he thought about that, because obviously God took care of his part of the bargain, but Louis Zamperini had not. And the way Laura Hillenbrand describes it in the book, you know, the event that happened on the raft was, you know, culminated with life-giving water coming out of the sky when it finally rained on him after not having water for 7 days. And so she talked about how he could feel the rain falling on his face as he's standing there in the tent. And he just walked down to the stage, and there happened to be an area down there with some counselors that would walk you through the process. And you know, he'd been having these dreams for the last year in the prison camp, and 4 years after the war since then. So he goes down there, he goes through the sinner's prayer, and he told me that he felt this great weight lifted off his shoulders. And when he got up off his knees, he knew he was done getting drunk, and he knew he was done fighting. And he knew he'd forgiven his prison guards, even the bird. And he went home that night, and it was the first night in almost 5 years that he didn't have that dream. And he never had it again the rest of his life. And he lived to be 97 and a half.
And he devoted his life to proclaiming the gospel, talking about God, and
Absolutely.
holding up that end of the bargain that he hadn't held up before that day.
He did. You know, a year after the encounter with Billy Graham, he went back to Japan. I mean, he knew he forgave his guards in his heart, but he went back to Japan in 1950 to seek out his guards and forgive them face to face. And that was a real test of his faith. And so he did. He went back there, and these guys were now in prison themselves because they were considered war criminals because of just the heinous conditions that they kept the Allied prisoners in. So he went back there and he forgave them. And he talked to them, looked them in the eye and told them that he forgave them. He even advocated for some of them to get a shortened sentence because they were the ones that were helping the GIs in the camp.
You know, that's truly forgiveness, though. It's one thing to be able to do it from a distance, but to actually go back and to face people and to even advocate for some people who had some level of involvement in that is a really stunning evidence of the change that he had in that tent that day.
Yeah, his conversion was real. And when he came back from Japan, after forgiving his guards in 1950, he thought, I want to give back. So he starts a life of helping at-risk youth. I mean, back in the day, we called them juvenile delinquents, but today they're at-risk youth.
It's a nicer term.
Yeah, well, it's more, it's more socially correct. He starts this thing called Victory Boys Camp, and he goes and gets hardened teenage criminals out of the youth correctional facility here in Los Angeles, take them up into the high Sierras, get their attention by, performing, feats of skill in the outdoors and teaching them survival skills, teaching them how to climb and rappel and boating and fishing and all that stuff. And so he'd get their attention, and of course, by the end of the week, they're ready to listen to him, and he tells them about having a life of faith in Jesus Christ. And so he did that his entire life. It didn't just limit it to teenagers, but he really did it his entire life. And when he passed on, the family kept it up. So we continue that today as the Louis Zamperini Youth Ministry, and we go into the youth correctional facilities and talk to the kids there, and we go to schools and anywhere that there are at-risk youth. And you might ask, well, where are they? Well, they're in public schools, they're in private schools, they're in churches, they're in correctional facilities. They're everywhere you look, there are kids that are at risk. And so that's our mission field. That's
incredible that you've continued that legacy.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like it was too great of a legacy to ignore. I mean, I just recently retired from 30 years in government service, and I just can't go golf my way into the sunset. There's too much responsibility being the son of Louis Zamperini and having this legacy that needs to be carried on. So much like the Apostle Paul felt that he was compelled to preach the gospel. He had no choice in the matter. I feel the same way when it comes to continuing to tell my father's story to people that can really benefit from hearing it.
And I think Unbroken, A Path to Redemption is another part of that storytelling. It's part of that legacy. What are you hoping audiences leave this film with? And it may be different from the first, I don't know.
Well, what I'm really hoping they leave with from this film is hope, which is what my dad's story really provides to people. We always hear from people that read the book or seen the movie or heard the story in one way or another and just said, oh my goodness, if he can get through what he got through, I can get through what I'm going through. If he can survive 47 days adrift at sea in a life raft, I can get through my kidney dialysis. If he could forgive the bird for what he did to him, I can forgive my brother who I haven't spoken to in 25 years. So what I really hope they walk away from is hope itself, that there are second chances in life.
Absolutely, and I mean his story shows that indefinitely, that there are many chances, and I think his story has been used to reach so many people. So it's incredible. I appreciate you coming down to talk about it. The last thing I would ask you, as the son of Louis Zamperini, is there anything in particular you have learned in your own journey from his story that's helped you personally?
Well, I mean, first of all, he was a great dad. He was a wonderful person to have for a father. And like I said, I didn't know that everybody else in the neighborhood didn't have a hero for a father. The greatest legacy he left me, though, was faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. And so I would tell my son as he was growing up, saying, you could come to the Lord the easy way, or you can go through 7 weeks of sea like your grandfather did. What I got from my dad's experience is invaluable. And, he had always told me that, you can go through life learning from your own mistakes, or you can learn from the mistakes of other people. So if you can look at someone else's experience and gain wisdom and knowledge, then go ahead and do that. And I've gained a lot of that just from observing my father.
I love that, and I appreciate you coming down today to share all of this.
It was my pleasure.
Everyone else, make sure you go out and check out the film, Unbroken, A Path to Redemption. You can tune in next week for the next episode of Pure Talk. You can go to facebook.com/pureflix.
Here's the deal. PureFlix.com has 6,500 titles you can watch right now. That's way too many to show you in just 90 seconds, but you know what? Here we go.
I am the man, you are the dog. I am talking to a dog.
How many times do you know the directions to your house, but you listening to the phone?
Yeah!